Emily Harper always believed her life was the embodiment of the American dream. A two-story house with a white picket fence in the suburb of Glenview, Illinois. A husband who kissed her forehead every morning. Two children who made Sunday breakfast a family tradition. She worked as a school psychologist at the local high school, knew every neighbor by name, and even baked cookies for the annual charity bazaar. Everything was right. Everything was according to plan. But on the day it all collapsed, Emily felt nothing. No pain, no fear, not even anger. Only emptiness. It happened in mid-March, when the snow had almost melted, but the air was still cold and damp. Emily was driving home from work when she saw police cars parked outside her house. At first, she thought something had happened to the neighbors. The Browns often had trouble with their teenage son. But when she saw the officers at her own door, her heart clenched. "Mrs. Harper," one of the officers asked, tall and tired-looking. "We need you to come with us." Inside, the house was noisy. People in uniform moved from room to room, taking photos, jotting down notes. In the kitchen sat her husband, David, his head bowed. Next to him, her best friend, Sarah, the one she'd known since college. Sarah was crying. "What's going on?" Emily's voice trembled. "Mrs. Harper?" The officer spoke slowly, as if afraid she wouldn't understand. "Your husband is suspected of financial fraud. We received a statement from your friend, Mrs. Wilson," he nodded at Sarah, "and have begun an investigation." Emily looked at David, then at Sarah. She couldn't believe it. Everything she knew about her life suddenly felt foreign. This is a mistake. This has to be a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. Over the next few weeks, Emily learned that David had been embezzling money from the school fund for 2 years, and Sarah had helped him cover it up. They were lovers all this time. And now, to save herself, Sarah had turned David into the police and implicated Emily as an accomplice. In a single day, Emily lost everything: her husband, her friend, her job, the respect of her neighbors. Her children were sent to live with their grandmother in another state while the investigation continued. The house was seized. She was left alone. The first weeks passed in a haze. Emily lived in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Chicago, survived on fast food, ignored phone calls. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. Sometimes it felt like she was watching her life from the outside, like a bad TV drama. But one morning, staring out the window at the gray sky, something inside her clicked. She remembered how her father used to tell her, "If you get knocked down, get up. If you can't get up, crawl, but never give up." Emily realized if she didn't start fighting, she'd be erased. She started small. She made a list of everything she still had: a little money in her account, a psychology degree, a few old friends who still believed in her. She decided she would prove her innocence. She would find out why Sarah betrayed her. She would get her children back, and she would make those who destroyed her life pay. But Emily's revenge wouldn't be quick or cruel. It would be smart. It would be just. It would be the kind of revenge no one could call petty. It would be the kind that made everyone see, behind the perfect facade, there's a truth no one wants to face. That evening, for the first time in weeks, Emily smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but the smile of someone who was no longer afraid. She had begun her journey. Emily's days blurred into one another, marked only by the changing light outside her motel window and the distant hum of traffic on Milwaukee Avenue. She spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every shared secret, every moment she trusted David and Sarah. The betrayal was a wound that refused to close, festering with every new revelation. She tried to piece together the timeline. When had David and Sarah started their affair? How long had they been plotting behind her back? The more she thought about it, the more she realized how many signs she'd missed. The late-night texts, the sudden inside jokes, the way Sarah had started to avoid her gaze at PTA meetings. Emily felt foolish, but she refused to let shame consume her. She needed clarity, not self-pity. One afternoon, she drove to the Glenview Public Library, a place she'd always found comforting. She sat in the corner, surrounded by the quiet rustle of pages and the faint scent of old books, and began her research. She read about financial crimes, legal procedures, and the psychology of betrayal. She made notes, filling a battered notebook with questions and observations. She also started reaching out to people she trusted. Her old college friend Lisa, now a lawyer in Evanston, agreed to meet her for coffee. Lisa listened patiently as Emily poured out her story, her hands trembling around a paper cup. "Emily, you need to protect yourself," Lisa said, her voice gentle but firm. "You need to avoid talking to the police without a lawyer. Don't sign anything, and don't trust anyone who was close to David or Sarah." Emily nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. Lisa promised to look into the case to see if there was any evidence that could clear Emily's name. For the first time since her world had collapsed, Emily felt less alone. At night, Emily's thoughts turned dark. She imagined confronting Sarah, demanding answers, screaming at her for the years of lies. But she knew that rage would get her nowhere. If she wanted justice, she needed to be smarter than both of them. She started to observe, quietly and methodically. She followed the news about the case, noting every detail that appeared in the local papers. She watched social media, where neighbors whispered and speculated. Some defended her, others eager to believe the worst. She noticed how quickly people turned, how fragile reputations were in a town like Glenview. One evening, she drove past her old house. The lights were off, the yard overgrown. A foreclosure notice was taped to the door. Emily sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, and let herself grieve for the life she'd lost. But as she watched the empty windows, she realized something. David and Sarah had destroyed themselves too. Their greed had left them with nothing. That thought gave her strength. She wasn't the only one who had fallen, but she could be the one who rose again. Emily began to rebuild, step by step. She found a part-time job at a small counseling center in Skokie, working with teenagers who reminded her of her own children. The work was hard, but it gave her purpose. She started attending therapy herself, determined not to let bitterness define her. She also began to gather information. She requested copies of the police reports, the financial records, anything that might prove her innocence. She kept everything organized, building her own case file. She knew it would take time, but she was patient. One day, she received a letter from her daughter, Lily. The handwriting was shaky, the words uncertain, but the message was clear. "I miss you, Mom. I don't understand what happened, but I love you." Emily pressed the letter to her chest and wept. She promised herself she would fight for her children, no matter what it took. As spring turned to summer, Emily's resolve hardened. She started to see patterns in the evidence, inconsistencies in Sarah's statements, gaps in the timeline. She realized that Sarah had more to lose than anyone: her own marriage, her reputation, her standing in the community. Emily wondered, what if Sarah had orchestrated everything, framing David and Emily to save herself? The idea was terrifying, but it made sense. Emily decided to test her theory. She reached out to an old acquaintance, Mark, who worked as a private investigator in Chicago. She asked him to look into Sarah's finances, her phone records, her movements in the weeks before the arrest. Mark was skeptical at first, but Emily's determination convinced him. "You're not the first person to be betrayed by someone you trust, but you might be the first to actually do something about it." The investigation began quietly. Emily kept her distance, careful not to alert Sarah or David. She focused on her work, her children, her own healing, but every night she reviewed the evidence, searching for the thread that would unravel the whole web of lies. She was no longer the woman who had been blindsided by betrayal. She was becoming someone new, someone who could smile through the pain, someone who could turn her suffering into strength. And as the first real clues began to surface, Emily realized this was only the beginning. Emily's life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by quiet determination and relentless curiosity. Each morning she woke before dawn, her mind already racing with questions. She would sit at the small desk in her motel room, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating the darkness, and sift through the growing mountain of documents she'd collected. Police reports, bank statements, emails. Each piece of paper was a fragment of the puzzle she was determined to solve. Mark, the private investigator, proved to be a valuable ally. He was discreet, methodical, and, most importantly, he believed her. Every few days, he would call with updates, his voice low and measured. "I've been following Sarah," he said one afternoon, as Emily sat in her parked car outside the counseling center. "She's been meeting with a man named Greg Thompson. He's a lawyer, divorce specialist. They've met 3 times in the last 2 weeks." Emily's heart pounded. Is she divorcing her husband? Looks that way. But here's the interesting part. She's also been making large cash withdrawals from her joint account. Thousands of dollars, Emily. And she's been in contact with someone at the school district's finance office. Emily's mind raced. Was Sarah trying to cover her tracks, or was she preparing to run? That evening, Emily sat in her motel room staring at the wall. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was uglier than she'd imagined. Sarah wasn't just the bystander. She was orchestrating something. Emily felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed proof, not just suspicion. She called Lisa, her lawyer friend, and relayed what Mark had found. Lisa listened carefully, then said, "Emily, if Sarah is moving money and meeting with lawyers, she might be planning to pin everything on you and David. You need to be ready." Emily nodded, even though Lisa couldn't see her. "I won't let her win." The next day, Emily decided to confront her past head-on. She drove to the school where she'd worked for nearly a decade. The building was the same. Red brick, wide windows, the American flag fluttering in the breeze. But it felt different now, colder, as if it too had turned its back on her. She walked through the halls, her footsteps echoing. Some teachers greeted her with awkward smiles, others looked away. Emily ignored the whispers and made her way to the principal's office. Principal Harris, a stern woman with sharp eyes, met her at the door. "Emily, I didn't expect to see you." "I need to talk," Emily said, her voice steady. "Off the record." Harris hesitated, then nodded. Inside, Emily explained what she discovered: Sarah's meetings, the money, the inconsistencies in the timeline. Harris listened, her expression unreadable. "I can't get involved," she said finally. "But I'll tell you this. Sarah was always ambitious. She wanted your job, Emily. She wanted more than that, I think." Emily left the office with a strange sense of relief. She wasn't imagining things. Sarah had motives, more than one. That night, Mark called again. "I found something else. Sarah's been emailing someone at a law firm in Milwaukee. The emails are encrypted, but I got a subject line: settlement." Emily's hands shook as she wrote it down. Settlement for what? "I don't know yet, but I'll find out." Emily hung up and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her children, about the life she'd lost, about the woman she used to be. She realized she was no longer afraid of Sarah or David or the whispers of the town. She was afraid of what she might become if she let this bitterness consume her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She would not let them define her. She would not let them win. The next morning, Emily received a call from her son, Ben. His voice was small, uncertain. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm fighting. I'm going to make things right." Ben was quiet for a moment. "I believe you, Mom." Those words gave Emily more strength than anything else. She promised herself again that she would clear her name not just for herself, but for her children. As summer deepened, Emily's investigation began to bear fruit. Mark uncovered a series of suspicious transfers from the school fund to an account in Sarah's name. Lisa found inconsistencies in Sarah's official statements to the police. Emily compiled everything, building a case that was impossible to ignore. She sent the evidence to the district attorney's office along with a letter detailing her own experience. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, she felt hope. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and left with nothing, but she was still standing, and now she was fighting back. The shadows behind the white picket fence were beginning to lift. Emily's hands trembled as she pressed send on the email to the district attorney's office. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done everything she could, gathered evidence, built her case, and now, finally, handed it over to the people who could make a difference. The rest was out of her hands. But the waiting was agony. She tried to distract herself with work, with long walks through the leafy neighborhoods of Skokie, with phone calls to her children. Ben and Lily were still wary, their voices cautious, but Emily could hear the hope returning, little by little. She told them stories about her day, about the kids she counseled, about the stray cat that had started visiting her motel window. She wanted them to know she was still their mother, still fighting for them. Mark kept digging. He found more: a hidden account in Sarah's maiden name, a series of encrypted messages between Sarah and a lawyer in Milwaukee, and, most damning of all, a forged signature on one of the key documents that had implicated Emily in the embezzlement. Lisa, her lawyer friend, was relentless, pushing the DA's office to take the evidence seriously. Then, one humid July afternoon, Emily's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Harper, this is Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim. I've reviewed your file. I'd like you to come in and speak with us." Emily's knees nearly buckled. She agreed to meet the next morning. The DA's office was in downtown Chicago, a world away from the quiet streets of Glenview. Emily sat in a small, windowless room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Rachel Kim was young, sharp-eyed, and direct. "Miss Harper, I've gone through your evidence. It's compelling. We're reopening the investigation into Sarah Wilson's involvement. But I need you to be honest with me. Did you ever suspect your husband or Sarah before the arrest?" Emily shook her head. "No, I trusted them. I was blind." Rachel nodded, her expression softening. "That's not a crime, Miss Harper. But what Sarah did, if we can prove it, certainly is." They talked for over an hour. Emily answered every question, her voice steady. When she left the building, she felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The next weeks were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Emily tried not to obsess over the investigation, but it was impossible. She checked her email constantly, jumped every time her phone buzzed. She started to see Sarah everywhere. In the grocery store, at the gas station, in the faces of strangers. Sometimes she wondered if she was losing her mind. Then, one evening, Mark called. They're bringing Sarah in for questioning tomorrow. They have enough to charge her with fraud, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Emily, you did it." Emily sat down hard on the edge of her bed. She felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. She had wanted justice, but now that it was within reach, she realized how much she had lost along the way. The news spread quickly through Glenview. Sarah's arrest was front-page news. Neighbors who had once shunned Emily now sent her cautious messages of support. Some apologized, others simply said nothing, but their silence was a kind of admission. David, her ex-husband, was still in jail, awaiting trial. Emily felt no pity for him, but she no longer felt hatred either. He was a broken man, undone by his own choices. The school district issued a formal apology, and Emily's name was cleared. She was offered her old job back, but she declined. Too much had changed. She was not the same woman who had once baked cookies for the PTA. One afternoon, as summer faded into fall, Emily met Sarah in the courthouse hallway. Sarah looked older, her face drawn and pale. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "I never meant for it to go this far," Sarah whispered. Emily studied her, searching for any trace of the friend she had once loved. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." Sarah looked away, tears in her eyes. Emily walked out of the courthouse, the crisp air filling her lungs. She felt free in a way she hadn't in years. That evening, Emily sat on a park bench, watching the sun set over the city skyline. She thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and nearly destroyed. But she had survived. She had fought back, not with violence or cruelty, but with truth and determination. She smiled, a real smile this time, and let herself hope for the future. The shadows behind the white picket fence had finally lifted. The days after Sarah's arrest were strangely quiet. Emily found herself waking up before dawn, listening to the distant sounds of the city, feeling the weight of the past year settle over her like a heavy blanket. She had won, in a sense. Her name was cleared, her children were coming home, and the truth had finally come to light. But victory didn't feel the way she'd imagined. There was no celebration, no sense of triumph, only a deep, aching exhaustion. She moved out of the motel and into a small apartment in Evanston, close to the lake. The space was modest, but it was hers. She bought secondhand furniture, hung her children's drawings on the fridge, and filled the rooms with the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Ben and Lily returned at the end of September. They were older, quieter, their eyes shadowed by everything they'd seen and heard. Emily hugged them tightly, promising herself she would never let them be hurt again. They spent long evenings talking, piecing together the fragments of their family, learning how to trust each other again. Emily returned to work, but not at the school. Instead, she joined a nonprofit that helped women in crisis, women who had lost everything, just as she had. She listened to their stories, offered advice, and, most importantly, believed them. She saw herself in their faces and their trembling hands and hopeful eyes. One afternoon, as the leaves turned golden red, Emily received the letter from Sarah. It was short, written in a shaky hand. "Emily, I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I never stopped loving you as a friend. I was weak, and I let my fear destroy everything. I hope you find peace." The legal process dragged on. David was sentenced to several years in prison. Sarah, after a plea deal, received a lighter sentence but lost everything: her marriage, her reputation, her home. Emily sometimes saw her name in the news, but she no longer felt the urge to follow every detail. She had her own life to rebuild. Lisa, her lawyer friend, became a regular presence in her life. They met for coffee, went for long walks along the lake, and talked about everything except the case. Mark, the private investigator, sent her a postcard from Arizona, where he'd moved to start over. "You're tougher than you think," he wrote. "Don't forget it." As winter approached, Emily found herself reflecting on the journey she'd taken. She thought about the woman she'd been, a wife, a friend, a mother who believed in happy endings. She thought about the pain, the betrayal, the nights spent alone in a motel room, wondering if she would ever feel whole again. But she also thought about the strength she'd discovered, the courage to fight for herself and her children, the determination to seek justice without losing her soul. She realized that the real victory wasn't in seeing Sarah punished or David behind bars. The real victory was in reclaiming her own life on her own terms. On New Year's Eve, Emily stood on the shore of Lake Michigan, watching the fireworks bloom over the water. Ben and Lily stood beside her, their hands warm in hers. She felt the cold wind on her face, the promise of a new year in the air. She closed her eyes and made a silent vow to live honestly, to love fiercely, and to never let anyone steal her light again. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She was free. And as the first snow began to fall, Emily Harper smiled, a true, unbroken smile, knowing that she had finally come home to herself.